Hello everyone, welcome. It must be Thursday because here we are live together. It is another Oh Yum 101 and today's theme is custard. Now I gave you some choices. We could choose between creme caramel, creme brulee, chocolate pot de crème, and a lemon curd. And you voted for the chocolate dessert. I get the feeling you like chocolate desserts. But still, this is a great opportunity to talk about making custards in general and comparing this chocolate pot de crème with recipes that you may be more familiar with, like a creme caramel or a creme brulee. For those of you who are unfamiliar with what a pot de crème is, it is, as the name sounds, translated from French, a little pot of cream. And doesn't that sound decadent? Most of the pot de crème recipes I've seen out there involve chocolate. And this is great because a pot de crème sits kind of in between a creme brulee and a creme caramel in terms of taste and texture. And I know some of you are baking along with me. I saw your posts with your photos. You've got your malt powder or cocoa mix ready. You've got your milk chocolate. And that is what actually sets one of the things that sets this apart. Last week, if you joined me for Oh Yum 101, you saw that I was using unsweetened chocolate to make my fudgy brownies. And I'm just gonna grab my milk to get it heating first. This time I'm baking using milk chocolate. And before I get too much further, I should do my shout outs, my Thursday shout outs to the important people who I know are watching. Well, all of you are very important. But today happens to be my dad's birthday. So happy birthday, Dad. Mom, me, I know you're watching. Bonnie down the street, Suzanne. We've got my sweetie Michael running the camera. So he's the one getting all these great shots of things zooming in and out. And as you know, TJ is the channel manager. So he's chatting to you through the thread throughout this Oh Yum 101. You know how it rolls, right? Okay, let's start by heating some milk. I've got 1 cup, so 250 ml of 2% milk. So that's an interesting conversation. Right there, before we do anything, let's talk about what makes a custard. A custard is a combination, typically, of dairy in some form, cooked with eggs to a certain set or thickness. Now, in the case of creme caramel, it's typically just milk with a combination of whole eggs, maybe 1 or 2 egg yolks. That gives creme caramel a silky, silky set and can be tipped out and it stands on its own. So you tip it out of the ramekin. A creme brulee, on the other hand, is on the other end of the spectrum. And the reason we love it so much is it's made using whipping cream, minimum 30%. Typically, here in Canada, we have 35% cream, and egg yolks. So think of that richness. That, with a little sugar, is baked gently, oven baked in a water bath, and then finished after it's chilled with that, of course, caramelized layer of sugar on top that you do afterwards, where creme caramel, you put it at the bottom of the dish and do it before. Also on your list when we were putting the poll out was a lemon curd, which is a custard. And you do that stovetop. You whisk eggs together with lemon juice, sugar, and instead of adding milk or cream, you add butter to thicken the custard. But in the case of this chocolate pot de crème, we've got chocolate, which in itself sets up when it's chilled. So we've got the combination of milk, chocolate, and egg yolks that makes this chocolate pot de crème silky and soft and creamy without being overly rich. And so that's why using 2% milk is important here. I wouldn't recommend using skim milk. It's just too thin and you won't get the right set. And I did see, it was, Nicola was asking, could I use cream instead of the milk in this custard? Yes, you could, but you might find it's a little bit too rich tasting. And by increasing that fat content too much, you might be at risk of splitting the custard because you've got the combination of egg yolks, cream, and chocolate, which is, woo, over the top decadent. While this is heating, I'm going to melt in my cocoa powder. Now you'll notice in the original recipe you were sent, I call for 1/2 cup or 50 grams of malted milk beverage powder. So there are many different brands out there. Depending on where you live, you have different brands available. Ovaltine is a well-known one, Horlicks. There are quite a few. So it's a chocolate or chocolate milk beverage. So it's pre-sweetened, but it's got that malt character. So let's talk about malt for a second, because it's actually an important ingredient in bread baking particularly. Now, I happen to not have malted milk powder, so I'm just using a hot cocoa mix. So it's a combination of sugar with cocoa powder in it. If you don't even have hot cocoa mix, you can still make this recipe. I'll have you measure a 1/4 cup, so 50 grams of sugar, and 2 tablespoons, I believe that's 16 grams of cocoa powder, any type, into your milk as it's heating, just as I'm doing here with my cocoa powder. If you have a flavored cocoa mix, you can certainly use that. You could add a little bit of orange zest. You could add a little peppermint extract. And in fact, I wanted to bring out a bit of a mocha character to my pot de crème today. So I'm adding just a teaspoon of instant coffee powder to the pot. I'm going to give that just a little mix just to get it melting in as the milk's heating. I'm heating it on low heat, but that's more for just a chance for us to have time to talk about things. You could heat this on medium heat. The point is to get it warm enough to melt your chocolate. So I'll just give that a quick whisk. Now, back to this topic of malt powder. Malting is a process of germinating and then heat drying grains. Quite often barley is the most common thing that is malted. And what happens in this process of malting, spreading out the grains, letting them germinate, and then air drying, it takes the starch within the grain and it breaks it down into a simple disaccharide, big word, which is 2-part sugar. So by breaking down the starch for the sugar, it makes it easier to digest and consume. And it's why bakers use it often in a bread recipe, because it will accelerate the yeast action in a bread. It also has, think about a toasted grain. If you like muesli that is made from toasted oats, barley flakes, things like that, that toasty flavor, just think of toast, toasting bread. That toastiness is the flavor character that you get in malt. That complements chocolate beautifully. And so that's why I picked that as a flavor to work into this recipe. But of course, if you don't have the malt powder, you can still make this recipe. It's going to be delectable. And what I like about it is that I'm using milk chocolate as opposed to semi-sweet or dark chocolate. Now, I will give you full permission to use semi-sweet or bittersweet chocolate in place of the milk in this recipe. You'll just want to increase your sugar by 1 to 2 more tablespoons, because milk chocolate has fewer cocoa solids, so it's milder tasting. It has a little more sugar, so it's sweeter tasting, and it has room for a little more cocoa powder. So that's why it's so soft, and you'll find it's not the warm weather today that's making this milk chocolate easy to chop. It by nature is a softer chocolate. So it's very mellow and mild, and this is why I chose it for a pot de crème, because I want that silky, cool, refreshing taste of the milk chocolate in the recipe. But as I said, you could replace the 150 grams or 5 ounces with the same measure of the semi-sweet or bittersweet chocolate. You increase the sugar, and when we get to the eggs, there are 4 egg yolks called for in this recipe. If you're using dark chocolate, reduce the egg by 1. So only use 4 egg yolks. Simply because semi-sweet chocolate sets more firmly than the milk chocolate. And as you know, you followed so many of my recipes here on OEM 101, so you know that in most cases, chocolates are not interchangeable in baking recipes. So if a recipe calls for semi-sweet or bitter, you can't just simply replace 1-to-1 with white chocolate or milk chocolate and expect the same result. That's just the nature of the chocolate. It's not you, it's not the recipe, it's just the chocolate. So if you're baking along with me, maybe you purchased your chocolate in chips already, so you didn't have to bother with the chopping step. I'm just looking for even-sized pieces because this is going to get melted into my chocolate. I'm getting a little bit of steam here, just making sure the sugar is dissolved. Okay, I'll admit, my hot cocoa mix that I added to this has a caramel flavor. So a little bit of caramel with a little bit of coffee. It's kind of in latte territory with the addition of the milk chocolate. I'm just gonna check the temperature to make sure, yeah, my chocolate can melt. You don't have to worry about getting the milk to a specific temperature. You just need it warm enough to melt the chocolate. So I'll just pour that right in. And I'm going to turn my heat right down because I don't want to scorch the chocolate at all. And now I'll just give this a stir. Now I had a few of you through social media and through the community here at Oh Yum asking about layering this pot de crème, because you see the picture, and in the original recipe I use glass dishes. Can you layer this with a dark, a milk, and a white chocolate? Cherry, you were one of the people that asked that question, and you weren't the only one either. And the answer is yes, you can. It will take a fair bit of time and patience, because what you would have to do is, before you add your chocolate, as I've done here, you would actually combine your eggs, sugar, and milk together. Then you would have to add a third dark chocolate, and then you would have to bake that on its own. You would have to pull it out of the oven, let it set a little bit. Then you would take another third of that custard base, add milk chocolate to it, bake that separately, pull it out of the oven, let it set, and then top it with the milk chocolate. So I think it's a great idea if you've got lots of time on your hand. It would take a little time and patience to do that. But wow, wouldn't it look absolutely phenomenal? So that was a very good question to ask. So I'm going to turn the heat right off. I've got essentially what looks like a nice, fluid, glossy chocolate ganache. And if you wanted to check the taste to see if you wanted to adjust it, do you want to make it a little sweeter? Do you want to add a little extra vanilla? Do you want to add a pinch of sea salt? As I said before, things like orange zest would be fantastic to add here while the heat can draw out some of the flavor. Peppermint, almonds, really anything that you like that goes with chocolate, this is the point to add it. So now I'm going to separate my eggs. I'll go this way. I have 5 eggs. At this point, it really doesn't matter what temperature the eggs are. When making a custard, you're getting that heat contact time. So we've got already our warm custard base that's going to heat up the yolks. So they don't have to be at room temperature. They also don't have to be ice cold from the fridge, however you get them. And you'll see I've got a mix here of brown eggs and white eggs. Does everybody know the difference between a brown egg and a white egg? Is it taste? Is it texture? A large egg is a large egg, so it's always the same weight, and it's graded that way. But it's simply the color of the chicken. Brown eggs come from brown chickens with brown feathers, and white eggs come from chickens with white feathers. No taste difference whatsoever. So I'll separate. I'm going to save my whites in a separate container. And your separated whites, if you're making a custard, your whites will keep for a good week in the refrigerator. You can also freeze egg whites, so you never want to throw them away. And I know that you have been watching this wonderful Oh Yum 101 live for a long time, so you know that I prefer to crack my eggs on a kitchen counter, giving it a single crack, and so I get a nice clean break of my eggshell, so when I have to twist it or flip it back and forth between to separate the egg, I don't have sharp edges or little pieces that risk falling into my batter or mixture. That one crack, and then I just use my thumbs to pull apart the shell. You don't have to be so arduous in your egg separating that if a little bit of white ends up in the bowl, if it means that you're going to avoid splitting the yolk and breaking it, that's absolutely fine. It doesn't really compromise this recipe. All right. Is that a macaron episode waiting to happen? Our weather's become very humid here, and as you know, when it comes to making macaron, humidity can make it a bit of a challenge. All right, so we've got our hot milk mixture with the cocoa powder mix. I'm gonna just stir my eggs, and then, because this isn't a boiling mixture, a hot milk mixture, I don't have to worry too terribly about it, but you do wanna gradually add that hot chocolate cream mixture, just so you're slowly introducing it to the eggs. And you'll find this is common for just about every single custard recipe. And don't forget things like pastry creams, that is a custard too. Anything with cooked milk and dairy, that all is part of the same family. All right, now for ease of pouring, I like to transfer this to a pitcher, and it's also a great opportunity to strain the custard. A custard doesn't have complicated ingredients, but the technique is very specific just to appreciate that simplicity, the silkiness of a custard. You want to follow the technique properly. That's why when I go out to a restaurant, I will, when we're allowed to go out to restaurants again, I love ordering creme brulee or a creme caramel or other custard recipe because it just takes such precision to do it, even though it's simple and cooling and refreshing at the same time. This is a great opportunity to strain the custard. So any of those little egg white bits will work out, any unmelted chocolate pieces. And if you can zoom in, Michael, you can see now the air bubbles. I have pulled away a lot of the bigger air bubbles from my custard. And that's a very important thing, especially if you're making a creme brulee. You don't want those bubbles to float on top of your custard because especially when you're caramelizing with sugar, it can interfere with how the sugar caramelizes and you just don't get that instant silkiness to it. And I've got another trick to kind of guide you through how to avoid that. Okay, so now I've got my dishes ready, and you'll notice in the original recipe I use little glass pots. Use whatever you have that is oven proof. It could be a simple ramekin. If you have a heat proof glass pot, if you do any preserving or jamming, the jars for jamming, the little ones are perfect for a pot de crème because they are heat proof. They're meant to be boiled when you're processing your jams or your pickles. So that's a great opportunity. I lent out my glass jars, so I don't have them on hand anymore. So I'm just showing you, you can have an assortment of sizes. I've got a more conventional curved ramekin. I've got oven proof. These are actually teacups, but they can go into the oven, and you want to put your ramekins in a dish because it's the water bath that's critically important when you're baking a custard of this style, just like a creme caramel or a creme brulee. Because it's the gentle water heat of the bain-marie, the water bath, that is gently cooking the custard. If I were to put these into the oven without that water to protect them, they would overcook on the outside before the inside has had a chance to heat up, and you wouldn't get that silky, silky texture. You don't have to grease your ramekins. And then I'm just going to pour into each. You could do smaller mini desserts if you wanted to, but I find this recipe makes a nice amount, a satisfying amount for 4 portions. Try and get them all the same height. And the dish you choose to bake your pot de crème in should be higher than the top level of the custard itself when you fill it. So if you find these fill up to the top, you would want to go into a deeper dish just so your water level can match. Just going to go around. So in addition to baking these custards, we're going to talk about garnishing them too. And since this Oh Yum 101 is really about custards in general, I'll also walk through how to torch for a creme brulee. We might as well do that, and some other nice garnishes. Now, another little tip is if you find you've got air bubbles, it's less of a concern with a pot de crème if you're going to garnish it with something like a little whipped cream, or you wanted to do, say you wanted to do a Dalgona coffee whip on top, you could certainly do that. If you were to want to creme brulee, a great tip is to take a little bit of dry paper towel, and I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see this. I'll take it out of the dish, Michael. And you just touch the paper towel on the surface of the custard, and you'll find that the air bubbles kind of gravitate towards the paper towel, and you can pull them up and away. And that way, if you're torching, you'll get a cleaner, more even layer of caramelized sugar on the top. So it really is just these little steps that make a big difference at the end. You'll also notice that I put a paper towel at the bottom of my dish. Because I'm going to flood this with water, the paper towel won't burn, but what it means when I'm carrying the custards to the oven and back again, they won't slide around the bottom of my slippery metal pan. So it's an easy little tip that is just, it's just kind of one of those little game changers. Kind of like flipping your springform pan base upside down when you're making a cheesecake so you can get your spatula under there. I've got my tea kettle. I just boiled the water right before we went live, so this shouldn't take long. It doesn't have to be boiling, boiling, boiling. And actually it was Blackwater who wrote before we started this live stream asking about the water temperature. I find that hot tap water just isn't quite hot enough. So it is best to boil some water in a kettle because what this is doing is getting that heat right into the custard as soon as you can, and it will ensure, at the same time as it's helping to cook the custards, it's actually helping to protect the custards so that it cooks at a more even rate all the way through. And so I only fill at this point about halfway. And that's just simply so I can practically walk over to the oven without sloshing the custards around. And then I don't need pot holders or a tea towel at this point. And I carry this over to the oven. And if you've got a more conventional oven, you just set these on the open oven door. And then you want to be careful that you don't splash to get water inside the custard. That's trickier if you have those flat creme brulee dishes. It's a little easier here with the chocolate pot. And I'm going to fill just almost up to the line of the top of the custard, so I know it's protected. And I'll just slide that in. Set my timer for 20 minutes. And the time really depends on the style and size of the dish you are using, because if you were using flat ramekins to do more of a creme brulee style, you may find it takes 13 to 15 minutes. The oven is set at 160 Celsius, 325 Fahrenheit. Typically, you'll find that a slightly lower oven temperature is what is called for most custards, and that's simply just so you have that even, soft cooking all the way through. So I do have some baked and cooled and chilled and ready for garnishing, but let's take a couple minutes because I'd love to pull these out so I can show you the doneness, what they look like when they're coming out of the oven. So we'll take a couple questions. Carol, you just asked, thank you for prompting me. The oven temperature, to recap, is 325 Fahrenheit, 160 Celsius, so it's nice and gentle. And here we go. Sagi, it's nice to see you here. I saw your name pop up. Thank you for joining me every week. Pastry cream looks a good consistency, but after adding the butter and refrigerating, it becomes watery. You do want to make sure you cool that pastry cream fully to room temperature before you put it in the fridge. If it's still not set, then maybe it might be the butter consistency or the ability of your starch to thicken, I would first try, without changing your recipe, if you're happy with the taste and the consistency out of the gate, I would recommend increasing your butter a little bit, because that is the simplest way to add more set to your custard without doing anything else to it. So I would give that first a try if you're happy with everything else in there. Next step would be to increase your egg yolk by 1 egg yolk. You do need to, if you're using cornstarch, you have to make sure you're reaching that full simmer to fully activate the starch. So make sure you're getting there too. So I hope that guides you through. This is great, getting direct custard questions. So I thank you for that one. That's a really, really good one. Oh, I see we're talking about the live streams and how long they're going to. Oh, Ryan, I'm gonna answer your question, another custard related question about ice cream. But yes, we are doing the live streams for the next few weeks, but it looks like I'm gonna have to get to work on creating some new recipe videos for you. So you're gonna have to give me a little time to do that. But I have enjoyed, both TJ and Michael, have you enjoyed this? He's nodding. We love connecting with you in this personal way, so it is fully our intention to continue with live streams. It just may not always be Thursday at noon at Eastern time, but we will definitely keep you updated, because it is important to me. I take my inspiration from you when it comes to baking. It's your suggestions, your ideas, what you're hungry to learn is what I feed off of. I want to learn, teach, and give it back to you. So we're all bakers, right? It all comes down to sharing. So forgive me if I missed your name, Ryan. You were asking about using whipping cream in ice cream. So a traditional French vanilla ice cream is a custard. You make it almost like a crème anglaise. It's a combination typically of milk and cream. If you use 100% cream in a custard ice cream recipe, you will find it's actually too rich. And when the fat from the cream combined with the egg yolks freezes, it gets almost a granular nature. You kind of lose that silkiness. So I usually do 2 parts milk to 1 part cream, and I find I get a good balance. And if it's a question of, do I make ice cream? We've been chipping away at this batch that I made. Did I make that last weekend, Michael? So we're getting down there. See, I love a good French vanilla ice cream. And that was, if you want me, I can rhyme off the recipe. That was 2 cups of whole milk, 1 cup of whipping cream, 35% cream. It was 2/3 of a cup of sugar and 4 egg yolks. So just like I made the chocolate pot de crème, heat the milk and cream with lots of vanilla, whisk the sugar and egg yolks together, cook it until set, and then once it's completely chilled, then I put it in the ice cream maker. I almost forgot my secret ingredient. You know, I love to add my skim milk powder to whipping cream to stabilize it so it holds its volume. I add 2 tablespoons of skim milk powder to my ice cream recipe to get it to thicken and tighten up, and it gives it a really satiny feel. So when you spin it in your ice cream maker, oh, it comes out beautifully. How was that for a free with purchase recipe? Okay, I'm gonna take a pause. I'll come back to some more of your questions in just a moment, but let's look at the pot de crème that I have already made and chilled. So out of the water bath and then cooling completely on a rack is what you need to do. Let them cool to room temperature. Just like a cheesecake, which if you join me for my cheesecake 101, you know a cheesecake is essentially a custard, and you need to cool it completely to room temperature to avoid it cracking. You also don't want to rush chilling a custard baked in a dish, like a creme brulee or a creme caramel or this chocolate pot de crème, these little pots of chocolate custard, because if you put it into the fridge warm, you may get condensation on the surface. If you are making a creme brulee, that can become difficult because you've got water on the surface of your creme brulee, and it leaves watermarks here. And you may see there's a little bit of a wow at the top. That is typical to a pot de crème, a chocolate pot de crème. You get this sort of, I find it very appealing. It's not a hole or a divot, but it just kind of sinks a little bit in the center. And when I pull these custards out of the oven, you'll see why that jiggle forms. So let's look at a couple of different ways to top our pot de crème, because this is lovely on its own, and you could certainly put just a couple of fresh berries on top, and everybody, I'm sure, would be quite happy. But what we're going to do, I'm actually going to leave those in that dish, is first do just a simple whipped cream by hand. You've got the proportions in the recipe.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
People keep asking how to identify the milk fat percent, like between milk and light cream and heavy cream.
Okay, thank you. Michael just asked a question for all of you because I'm not catching everybody's. It's about checking the milk fat on your milk and cream. And it really does depend on where you live, what your country requires in terms of posting the milk fat. So in Canada, we have to post the actual fat content on the label itself. So 2%, 3.8%, 1, and 0. What you may find, there are also common terms. So non-fat or skim milk has 0%. If it's called low-fat or partly skimmed milk, that could be 1% or 2%. And homogenized milk is your 3.2 to 3.8%. It does vary in countries, as does whipping cream. In Canada, our whipping cream is 35%. It can even vary, though, province to province. It can be 36%, I believe, in Alberta. And if you live in Europe or other countries, you can get up to 40% whipping cream. So if it doesn't say on the label itself, you should find and be able to tell from the nutritional information on the back. So I hope that guides you through. Now, let me grab my spatula. I'm just making a little bit of whipped cream to put on top. Remember, there's milk in the custard. So to add a little cream is just, a custard is all about the creaminess. So we're just building on that slight contrast. It's not complicated. Yes, you could use a mixer, but I've got time, right? We're just hanging out and visiting, so I'm just whisking by hand. Any cream lower than 30%, you will not be able to whip. You need that percentage of fat content to get the full volume. So while I'm whipping, look at this. Oh, and here's another good cream question. Oh, Nana is asking, is whipping cream and heavy cream the same thing? And again, yeah, it depends on the country you come from, how your labeling works. But yes, heavy cream is your whipping cream. Here we have a cream called table cream that's 18%. So it sits in the middle, and we call our coffee cream, our 10% cream, half and half. Everybody's got a different label. If you just look it up, you can find your equivalencies. So that's nicely whipped up. You could just add a little sugar if you want. If you've got your malt powder, this is a great opportunity to use it to sweeten and build on the flavor. So I'm just going to add about a tablespoon. If you were using sugar and cocoa powder in your pot de crème instead of malt powder or a cocoa mix, I would leave cocoa powder out of the cream because you'll find it's not fine enough to really dissolve into the cream. Hey, here's a great tip. I'm going to show you a little trick because in my talking and whipping, see what I've done? I've overwhipped my whipped cream. Has anyone else done that? I'm going to look at the thread because it happens to everyone. You turn away for a second and you've overwhipped your whipped cream. See how it's not smooth and silky anymore? I've got the fix for that. So I have done it enough that if I need to whip 2 cups of whipping cream, I will always hold back 1 or 2 tablespoons just in case I overwhip it. So what you do is you take just a tablespoon or so of fluid cream, add it to your overwhipped whipped cream, and this time, not so much whipping, because that's what did you in the first time. And you'll find that this dissolves the fat. And see how it's smoothing out again? There we go. That's how you fix overwhipped whipped cream. Now, if you overwhip to the point where you see liquid or water separating it, well, congratulations, you're making butter. And it might be a sweetened butter. But so once you see liquid separating, you can't go back. But if you have over whipped it a little bit, that is a great trick. I've got a little piping bag here, so I'll spoon this hint of chocolate sweetened whipped cream into a piping bag. I've just got a little star tip. It could be a simple dollop on top. And I'm just going to pipe a little on one side. I don't want to hide the pot de crème completely. This is just a little accent. And then it could be a simple addition of, I've got some mini white chocolate chips here. You could do chocolate shavings. A berry could go on top of that. I also have some praline hazelnuts. Hazelnuts that were cooked in caramelized sugar and then ground. That sounds like another Oh Yum 101 happening, doesn't it? To do little baker's tricks like that. The decor and garnishes, those little extras, tuiles, brandy snaps, Florentines, things like that. Actually, that reminds me, the Florentine video just came out last week, but tomorrow, right here on Oh Yum, a brand new recipe is being released, and this is a fun one. My chocolate whoopie pies with a creamy peanut butter filling. If you've never had a whoopie pie before, it's kind of like an easier to eat cupcake. You have 2 cake cookies with the frosting sandwiched in the middle. So here we've got these 2 lovely pot de crème.
Tip them forward and I'll zoom in.
I love a simple custard dessert, honestly. So we've got one for you, and let's get to some fun. I may be one of those pastry chefs that got into the industry because then I knew I could play with fire. We've got a blowtorch here, and this is why I've left my chilled chocolate pot de crème in a ramekin dish, because I don't want a torch on my wood surface. You can put your ramekins on a baking tray. Make sure there's no parchment paper on there. So when it comes to torching, a vanilla creme brulee shows off the color best because you can see that caramelized sugar on top. But what a lovely surprise to get that treat of a caramelized sugar layer on top of this custard. So what I like to do is when I'm adding sugar, I use fine, just regular granulated sugar. You can use superfine sugar as well. It will dissolve faster, but I find the trick to getting a really good creme brulee surface that has substance, doesn't have the granules of granulated sugar, but isn't so thick that you can't bite through it, is layers. So the first thing I do is I sprinkle, and I'll lift this so you can see, Michael, a nice, not too thick layer of sugar on top. And then I'll start torching, and then I'll lift the torch away, never torch and put your hand in at the same time. And I'll add another sprinkle of sugar. And the hot sugar from the first layer will start melting the second layer of sugar, and you'll find it's easier to build that nice, even, crunchy, but well-dissolved layer of caramelized sugar. Just keeping an eye on my timer. We've got about 5 minutes on that first round. This is a butane kitchen torch. Sometimes you see professional pastry chefs have the full plumbing torch. The kitchen one usually, if you're not making creme brulee every day, this is sufficient. And so you don't really need it to brown at this point, you just want to melt it. Oh, I may have not put enough fuel in my torch. Okay, we're gonna see a quicker version of it. Yeah, that'd be great. It's in the cupboard under the bookcase. Do not store your butane with other foods. You want to keep it in a cool, dark place. Yeah, I need to refuel my torch here. Thank you. This is why you join me for Oh Yum 101 Live, because it's the real deal. So this is how your butane comes, and you just... There we go. Give it a second to blow off. I don't want to ignite it right now. Move the canister away. So just to show you while I'm letting this blow off, that I've dissolved the sugar, but I've got just the sheerest layer of caramelized sugar on top. There we go. Now we're cooking with fire. So you want to get into the corners. This is why you need another reason. This is a teacup. I wouldn't want to use my torch on something light like this. The porcelain of a good ramekin can handle the heat of the torch. And dissolve that sugar through. And I'm gonna have to load it up again. We also use this to light the barbecue sometimes, don't we? Yeah, I'll give it another fire up. Just a second.
Question from Cherry. If they don't have a torch, can they put it under the broiler?
Oh, that's a great question, Cherry. Asking about broiling your brulees. Okay. Yes, you can. And actually, a chocolate pot de crème is a great thing to brulee because it's a little more substantial than a crème brulee. Fine sugar, definitely, in a simple layer, and then a single layer, and then under the broiler, but do not walk away. Honestly, it'll take 15 seconds, and I would do that about 3 times, layering the sugar on, because you'll find if you put too thick of a sugar layer under the broiler, you'll get it melted on top, but it won't dissolve underneath. So that was a fantastic question to ask. Whoa, there we go. That's what we needed. There we go. So you can just see, I'll lift it up so you can see the hint of brown caramel color on top. So on a vanilla creme brulee, you obviously see it a little bit more. But what I do like about torching a chocolate one is it kind of melts the top chocolate layer. So when you break into it, you get that crack of the custard, kind of the softness of the melted chocolate custard, and then you get that cool, refreshing, creamy custard underneath. And if you've added that malt flavor, well, it's just taken it to a new level. You can still put the whipped cream on it after it's cooled if you wish, or just let it be. Just remember, if you want to do the torching, you want to do that within an hour of serving it. So you can fully prepare the custard ahead of time, and then you can add the rest after. I think I love the idea of the hazelnuts on here. If you wanted to add other flavorings or a spirit to enhance it, you could do that too, like a hazelnut or a coffee or an orange liqueur. That is my timer. Got that. Let's see how our custards are doing. I'm going to pull it out so you can see where we are, see if it's done or if we have to put it back in the oven. So normally, I wouldn't go back and forth with the whole pan. I would check from here, give the custard a little wiggle, but I'm going to pull it out so you can see it carefully. Not spilling it on my laptop. So just by giving the custard a little jiggle, you can see how it's set around the outside, and there's about this much in the center that still seems a bit fluid. This could use another 3 to 4 minutes, so I'm going to put it back so that it just sets up. You still need to see that jiggle in the center. You don't want it to be fully set because then you're at risk of having the outside overcooked. The middle will continue to cook outside of the heat of the oven. But another 3 to 4 minutes, just so it's not so liquidy. It should look like it wouldn't, if you were to bump into it, it shouldn't look like it would spill in the center. So I'm gonna just pop that back in, but that's great. If you're great, I'll take some more of your baking questions. There we go, another 3 minutes. Okay, oh, look at those questions come rolling in. I think some of you are having conversations with each other too, because I'm seeing questions about jelly powder and agar. That's actually...
Someone really wants to know if they can use a steamer.
A steamer, oh my gosh, yes. That's a great question. If you want to make these custards using a steamer, it could be a bamboo steamer or other steamer, you just need to protect the top of the custard so that the water doesn't drip in. So control your steam so that you don't have that condensation dripping into the custard dish itself. But yes, because essentially what I'm doing here with the water bath is creating a nice, gentle steam environment. So that's a fantastic question. And I saw a question come up about using stevia in place of sugar. Yes, that is an option. I also like agave syrup as a sugar-free option. The nice thing when it comes to a custard, it's really about how the cream or milk sets with the eggs. So the sugar here, unlike a cake, the sugar is not for more than sweetening. So it gives you a lot of creative options. Think maple syrup or honey or other sweeteners that you might like. But yes, you could reduce the sugar if you wanted to. So that was Jonathan's question. Thank you. Oh, Erica, you're asking a fantastic question about altitude. Altitude baking. Are you writing from Denver, from Calgary? I think, Erica, I saw you sent me the picture with your malted powder. And so I actually went to cooking school in Vail, Colorado, just outside of Denver, a million years ago. And it was very high altitude. So I actually went to cooking school learning how to bake at a high altitude. And a custard, fortunately, most custards at high altitude do not need to be adjusted in terms of altitude baking because it is simply the setting of the eggs and dairy. Where you have an issue with altitude baking is anything that has volume, especially with what we call chemical leaveners, baking powder and baking soda. So in a nutshell, the issue with altitude baking is a lower air resistance, lower air pressure. So things rise up easily. So what that means to control a baking that's a recipe that's been designed for sea level is you need to balance out that lower air pressure. That means lowering your leavening, reducing your baking powder and baking soda, and potentially your whipped eggs in a recipe so that they don't rise up so quickly. Lowering your oven temperature also helps to do that. So then your ingredients have more time to raise and connect and bond together before that air pressure sort of throws it out of whack. The other thing you can do with your altitude baking, and this is more for things like muffins, cakes, loaf cakes, etc., is to add a little more liquid. So for a basic banana bread, 12 muffin style recipe, single layer cake, add an extra 2 tablespoons of be it milk, juice, fruit puree, whatever it is that's liquid in that recipe. And again, that kind of buys time for the ingredients to set as they're facing that lower resistance in the oven. So I hope that really helps explain things. I was amazed how long it took to cook rice at 10,000 feet above sea level. It is crazy. So that was a great question, Erica. And I hope you've made the pot de crème and are happy with what you've got in the oven right now. Okay, there's a conversation. I love that you're having conversations with each other about these ingredients. The flour, let's talk flour 101. The basic type here in North America, the 3 types you have that relate to different types of baking are bread flour, cake and pastry flour, and all-purpose flour. They're actually milled from different types of wheat. And those types of wheat have a different protein or gluten content in them. So bread flour is milled from a hearty winter wheat that has a high protein content. Cake and pastry flour is milled from what's called a softer wheat. It's a summer wheat. It's got a lower protein content. It's also milled finer, and that's why it's suitable in cakes. All-purpose is actually a blend of the two together to a finite, a consistent protein content. So that's the difference between the three. Sometimes you see other specialty flours with different names and different functions, but that's really the spectrum. It's all about the protein content. So if you make a nice, delicate angel food cake using bread flour, you may find you're chewing through it, or it toughens up as you bake it, and you get a bigger crust to it because of the protein in the flour. And if you were to try and make a loaf of bread using cake and pastry flour, your yeast, the carbon dioxide that your yeast produces would push right through, and then your bread might collapse. So that's kind of the outcome and why we specify certain flours in different baking recipes. Okay, I'm getting Michael signaling the oven. You're right, I should check. Oh yeah, I didn't hit start on the timer. Let's go check on the custards. Yes, okay. This is what I'm after, because in giving this a little jiggle, now I can see it's not so fluid. There's still movement in the center of the custard. But see how it looks like there's almost a cap over top? So I know it's still a little jiggly underneath, but I've definitely got a distinctive set on the side. Now, what I'd like to do is get these out of the hot water, because this hot water will stay hot for another 15 to 20 minutes. It will continue cooking the custards. So you can take a tea towel, kind of wrap it around your hand, or if you have an oven mitt, and reach carefully. You want to make sure you don't get your towel wet, because that immediately conducts the heat and it's hot, and then you risk dropping your custard. I make a lot of jam in the summertime, and this contraption is how I lift jams in and out of the boiling water, the jars, easily. So it's a common tool you find if you're buying the little jam jars to make your glass pot de crème so you can see the chocolate. This is an easy tool to pull it out of the water, and you'll notice I didn't have my cups slipping around because I had that paper towel in there. And so I will let these cool completely to room temperature before I put them in the fridge. And then my neighbor Bonnie down the street knows she gets a little note from me in a little bit, and I pop by with some desserts.
Bachelors are watching.
Oh, Mary and Thomas, hello, hello. Well, they might get some too, because we've got quite a few done here.
How long can you keep them in the fridge?
Oh, good question. How long do these keep? And I saw that note. That was a very good note. I missed the note, the person who wrote it. But talking about how long things last in the fridge is a very important topic if you're baking, and especially if you want to share what can freeze, what can't, etc. I'm going to switch this one out because it's prettier. I'll leave this one. These would keep longer than a creme brulee because it has the chocolate to kind of hold it. So you are fine with a good 4 to 5 days in the fridge. It is a good make ahead dish. So you can make it a full day ahead of when you serve it. So you've got lots of options. We've talked about flavor. We've talked about what malt is. So if you're following this recipe specifically, you know what to do, how to, oh, I'm getting the cue, dig in. Stop talking, Anna. So you can see that creaminess. I don't want to put a big spoonful in my mouth. I'll eat that bite later, but I want to make sure you see how it's not like a ganache. It's soft like a custard. You want that bite? I'm going for the one with the hazelnut. So it's got a richness to it. Is it overly sweet, Michael? How do you?
It's beautiful, balanced. It's not sweet, but there's a little crisp on the top. And the nuts have that beautiful nutty character.
And that really is at the heart of a good custard. It's about that silkiness that's there. It's not overly one thing or the other, and then magically it's gone. So you need to take another bite. So I hope you've enjoyed today's Oh Yum 101 custards. I think we covered a lot, more than just the recipe itself. So I will be back next Thursday with another Oh Yum 101 live. You can look to the community page for the poll on Saturday because I'll be asking you to vote. But we're going to do, this is something you've been asking for over the course of the last couple of months. So I hope you enjoy what the vote is. Should I give you the hint? No, you're gonna have to come see on Saturday. I will also post the poll on my social media channels so you can vote on the flavor of this style of recipe. And this is definitely one that is bake along friendly if you want to bake it along with me. So just as a reminder, thank you again to everyone who has joined me live. But this Oh Yum 101 will live on the Oh Yum page. Just give us a little time to upload it with all these fabulous tips, the recipe included below. Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic weekend. Keep it safe and keep it sweet. Now I get to eat this. I'm gonna let that bit go to waste.